All right. I'm super excited today. I have one of my very, very favorite writers in all of the internet, in all the world, really. And I had a chance to meet up with my good friend, Joel Bowman. How are you, my friend? Good to see you.
Good, mate. Thanks for having me along to our little virtual meeting place
It's
here.
it's great to catch up with you. I met up with Joel in November of 2024. I was down in Buenos Aires, where he writes a really compelling Substack. Would you tell people it's notes from the end of the world? Now, the notes part, I want you to explain, but from the end of the world is, of course, the reference to what is happening in Argentina. And what is happening in Argentina right now is really worth a deep look because I don't think most people are actually like you're there. You see what's actually happening. Anything that people are getting up here is, filtered through Twitter and, references to Doge and things like this. But Milei has done one of the really, really tremendous things in history thus far. And so, where do you see that going? Talk to people about your Substack first so they get a sense of sort of what you do and how you think and sort of your view of the world that I find so entertaining and so valuable.
Well, yeah, thanks again for making the time, Tan. I really appreciate talking to your audience and your listeners out there. Thanks for taking the time. Um, as far as notes from the end of the world, as you mentioned, it's a Substack I've been writing for about 20, no, since 2020, late 2023, right about when Milei kind of came to the presidency down here in December of that year. I've been living here in Argentina since on and off since about 2010 with my wife. And it was really just kind of dumb luck that we happened to be living here when this event, what I've been calling with characteristic understatement, the greatest political experiment of our age, began to unfold. And so it wasn't like I moved down here because I thought the ground was ripe for some kind of free market anarcho-capitalist revolution, or that it was fertile grounds for such an event. But it just happened to be that we were here, and even before he became a joke among the sort of the expert chattering class and the kind of scoffing hoi oligoi in the press, he was still, he was such an outsider that people, he wasn't even taken seriously at that point. And I was paying attention because he was writing the kind of, or talking about the kind of, you know, wacky concepts that you and I think probably your readers are very familiar with, bizarre outside fringe ideas like private property and the non-aggression principle and limited government and balanced budget and sound money and all these kinds of things where, people who graduate with PhDs in economics go a long way out of their way and spend a lot of money to avoid understanding. And he was talking about this kind of stuff on television down here, and he had a very kind of charismatic delivery, and he's very over the top with his rhetoric, and very kind of, he has a lot of sort of Latin flair in that way. So that was highly entertaining. And anyway, when he came to the Casa Rosada, which is the Pink House, the Argentina's answer to the White House, I guess, in December of 2023, he said something that really kind of piqued my attention and actually began showing up in mainstream outlets around the world, and that was that he summed up the situation for not just the Argentine government, but I think many governments around the world when he said simply, "No hay plata." There's no money. We are broke. We have no money in the savings account.
Yeah, he
All these
said
pet
it. He was like the one,
yeah.
that the wheel finally went round and people were like, I think it I think it might be all the extra spending, you know. And
Right.
and people heard it because he was brash and in your face. I mean, he's a wildly entertaining character for a politician. Obviously, he has this
Mhm.
whole chainsaw shtick, but it works, right? It works. Like we live at a time where I don't know, just like common parlance and common discourse has become vulgar enough that this guy is able to say on TV in that interview that I saw up here. I'm sure other people saw too. He's like, because the people on the left are shit. You can't give them an inch, right? And he's carrying on like this, but everybody was like, no, that's true, actually. Like what this guy's saying is actually accurate and true. And so this whole thing of like, what you can't print and spend more money than you're producing from your country. That's it. That's how you've been getting ripped off. So I was there. I talked to several dozen taxi drivers, the people who worked for us or served us at the hotel, the hippodrome while we were there. Just magnificent. God, Buenos Aires. It's just such a. If you haven't been there, right, and you need to do some good traveling to just a wonderful city. I mean, there's nothing like it. It has that European flavor, but it's just so massive, right? Everything is so wide open and it's so pleasant, the architecture and all the rest. And so, my impression was from about 90% of the people I talked to was that they get it. Like they get it, like he explained Austrian economics and like real, no kidding, here's how the world actually operates and here's who's been ripping you off. And he explained this in a way that like several generations of people can't unlearn. Like they can't not know
Right.
what he has now taught them, which is just the greatest achievement, I feel like, in politics, probably in our lifetime, but certainly in, like just at a level of teaching that he could bring these ideas. It's like, this is what's going on. This is why you've been getting screwed for 40, 50, 60, 70 years. And people got it. They were like, oh, that makes total sense. Remarkable.
Yeah. One of the things that kind of flashes back in my mind as I kind of recall the days pre-election, and the Argentine election system is kind of weird here, but they have runoffs, and it kind of whittles down to the the last man, woman, or cloaca standing, and anyway, I asked a friend of mine, an Argentine guy who's pretty well plugged in here, about Milei's chances, and I said, this was going into the very final election round, and I said, do you think this guy could actually win? And he looked at me really quizzingly, and he sort of said, what do you mean? He's already won. And his point being, this toothpaste is out of the tube. It's the fact that he's been able to sort of plant the seed of doubt, that old sort of, the emperor has no clothes parable or fairy tale. It's the idea that once somebody says, actually the government isn't the solution to your problems, it's the source of your problems, then there's this kind of like, the spell is broken. And he broke that spell. Yeah, he broke that spell not just for people who had become disenfranchised with the status quo down here, and that being largely the kind of Kirchneristas that had prevailed with some, with some perforations of harder right politicking for the past 3/4 of a century. But he broke the spell for a whole new generation of people who had maybe heard the kind of vexations and lamentations of their elders. And not only that, they saw that there was actually probably a third option, and it wasn't the right against the left, but it was them against us. And they had a big paradigm shift in the way that they conceptualized the political world around them. And that really, that demographic, that younger demographic, really showed up at the polls big time for Milei. And that was the demographic that had, what was it? I think it was Winston Churchill, perhaps, who said, if you're in your 20s and you're not a liberal, you don't have a heart. If you're in your 30s and you're not a conservative, you don't have a brain. He disrupted that kind of left-right. It's a fairly sort of lazy way of thinking about a political spectrum, and said, actually, it's these people down in Puerto Madero, down here, for example, which is, where all the political movers and shakers live. He said, hey, you guys are living in the barrios, right? You're living in the villas and the neighborhoods, complaining about candidate A on the right or candidate B on the left. And they share apartment buildings and $1 million condos down over the thing. They're all on the same team, and they're all working around the clock, handshaking and glad handing and pork barreling and the rest of it to rip you off. And you guys are in here. As long as you're divided, then they're going to continue to do that. And yeah, you may have your theories about which politician is worse, but it was really a case of awakening that whole new demographic, which was a really seismic generational change for Argentina, and I think one that inspires quite a bit of hope for the future.
It's just incredible. And so that leads into what I wanted to highlight about, you make this point, and you're one of the best exemplars of this that I know of, this decentralized sort of alternative, quote, quote, media that has really taken the mantle and sort of, right, taken the mic from mainstream media. You wrote a piece recently. So like you're able to share with people ideas, and I'm going somewhere with this because like at the level of individual thought and action is really where the battle is won or lost. And I'm reminded of that because of what happened during COVID. You know, the whole lockdown thing, which is still like a big post-traumatic. You know, I watched an interview. Porter Stansberry talked to oh shoot, who's the guy? Finance technology, Ed Dowd. And you know, they're saying that you're looking at, you know, deaths among young people is still, you know, 5 to 10% above base, like above normal. Like there's still like major fallout from this. And what was the solution to all of that? The same thing we've been talking about with Milei. It's like stuff that everybody knows. Somebody finally stood up and said, you know, at that level of individual decision making, if you just said like, but I'm not taking part in this, or, you know, like this isn't true anymore. So it's like it always comes down to that. Like Milei got to people at the deepest level, which is like individuals who've never studied economics ever. They don't know anything about money or why they keep, you know, like why their government keeps defaulting and like, you know, inflation is going up. Like they haven't thought through how all that works. And this guy made it obvious to them in a way that changed their behavior, which is, you know, that's as historic as any idea can be. You know, a huge population had like a complete change of heart. And so, you know, looking back at the 2020s thus far, it's like we're living in this unbelievable moment where somebody can write a Substack, like Notes from the End of the World, and talk about deep, meaningful ideas like this. And so just want to quote this because it's so good. I got such a laugh. This is your latest piece. Doge versus the deep state. So recently, like yesterday, a bunch of stories came out in the last couple of days as we're recording about USAID. And I want to get your hit on this. I'll shut up in a second, but like you captured this so well. So the BBC reported, right? And then all the way down at the bottom, you find out the BBC is receiving money from USAID, you know? So the point being, right? I mean, it is a pisser, right? You have to laugh at just the cheek, right, of these people.
Yeah.
To pretend like the system isn't as corrupt as it is. But we're living at a time when this can all be outed. It's very odd, don't you think? Times of great political chaos are also times of great investment opportunity. Watching this channel means you're interested in strategies for making and keeping generational wealth. That's why I want to tell you about the guys at CapEx Insider. This is probably the premier financial newsletter for independent investors over the next decade. Why? Because Chris McIntosh and Brad McFadden have a take on what's happening and how to profit from it, ideally suited to the massive shift currently underway all across the globe. For example, Chris understood that the green energy nonsense was just that, so he recommended an offshore oil services company that went up almost 1,000% in a year. That's 10 times your money in 12 months. Chris is one of the best guys in the game spotting counter-cyclical, counter-jurisdictional opportunities long before anyone else has a clue. He told readers to buy Argentina long before it became big news and there was a turnaround coming. His Argentina picks would have already delivered you life-changing money, and that's a situation that just keeps getting better and has years to run. You see, the problem with most newsletters is that you seldom get any interaction with the analyst or a chance to ask questions. Capitalist Exploits Insider lets you look over the shoulder of one of the best hedge fund managers in the world with highly entertaining Q&A calls for a fraction of the cost of paying an actual hedge fund manager. Chris and Brad host regular Ask Me Anything calls and timely video updates where you can speak directly with Chris and his team. That's why CapEx Insider is rated 4.8 stars on Trustpilot, which is practically as high as you can get. Best of all, right now, you can test drive CapEx Insider for 7 days for just $1. Click the link below to get all the details and to join Capitalist Exploits Insider. You can thank me later.
Yeah, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head there with the idea that it's the individual that is the most aggressed against minority on the planet. And we are individual units in a way that human action is undertaken at the individual level, but ideas is the network that those individual actions spread through and take on their larger kind of almost mythological proportions as they do in whether it's a religion or a state or a sports team or a music concert. You see people getting up and they get into this almost kind of like a trance of this kind of group activity. And yeah, Milei really was able to kind of fracture that and speak to people at an individual level. But just as far as information dissemination through new media technologies goes, this was overripe for the picking. I mean, the way that centralized media outlets, these, I call them the Pavlovian prostitutes, and the kind of gatekeepers of information have abused their listeners and their readership over the past, goodness, I mean, at least since I've been paying attention. I studied journalism at college level, much to my everlasting shame and embarrassment. And I've seen, you know, I've seen just this road to perdition, and this constant Faustian pact making that the, so-called flag bearers of the Fourth Estate have undertaken just in the past couple of decades, where, we used to talk about, or at least pay lip service to, quaint little mottos like speaking truth to power and afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted, and all these kind of, these sort of like quaint
It's
little
kind of amusing
platitudes.
now, you know?
It's quaint, right? It's this parochial little kind of platitudes, but uh, so some of us believe that early on, at least until we kind of stepped out of the shower mist and saw the world for what it was. But now we have mediums like, and I'll give a shout out to our Substack here. I publish my notes from the end of the world on Substack. There are tens of thousands of independent voices who are circumventing these portals that are owned, and now, as you mentioned, with the whole USAID scandal, funded by interested actors. These are not impartial, objective, just the facts, ma'am type journalists that you might have, that our parents might have grown up with watching on the television or
We
reading
are
in
all shills now.
newspapers.
No, not all of us, but yeah, exactly.
It's not the H.L. Mencken's and the Henry Hazlitt's and those that are writing under our major mastheads now. And one of the big shifts that happened there, I think, and I've paid some kind of peculiar amount of attention to this because it is or was my chosen métier, that of a sort of part-time journalist. But the idea that journalism used to be a kind of factory floor apprenticeship type profession, right? It was the people, it wasn't like we were plucking people out of Cornell and the Ivy League and these sort of, ordained ministries of higher education. It was people, you went to work at the local paper, you followed a beat, you got to know the people in your community, whether it was, the police officers or the guy that runs the hot dog stand or the old lady whose cat keeps getting caught up a tree. Like you were in touch with your local community, and people bought or sold, or, bought or didn't buy your reportage based on your reputation, how closely you adhered to the facts, and how unbiased and even-handed you were. It went away from that probably sometime in the 70s and 80s when information really started getting weaponized, particularly in the US in the aftermath of the Vietnam War. And basically since then, it's been, the kind of hockey stick of propaganda has just absolutely gone vertical. And of course, now we're seeing, again, with all the USAID stuff, that this massive $50 billion annual slush fund for, misinformation and disinformation and propagandizing and smear campaigns and, et cetera, has really gone to just capture that entire just morass of so-called objective media. And it's no surprise. I mean, none of your listeners will be surprised when they find out the names of the news wires who have been recipients of multi-million-dollar USAID contracts, or that money was given to Eco Health Alliance, or I mean, just the further you go down the rabbit hole, the kind of more you want to just
Slimier it
go and
gets.
take a,
Yeah.
you want to go and take a nice walk around the park and push your kid on the swing and remind yourself that life's still good and that there are still
No, it's
courageous and
dark.
happy people in the world.
It's very dark. So here's where my mind goes with that. Because you're absolutely correct. And you can get this as part of Joel's Substack. I encourage everybody to check out Notes from the End of the World. I'll have a link below this, obviously. He's such an entertaining writer. Like you read it for you're learning, like you're learning deep stuff, but it's also very witty. Always enjoy it. And so this thing about USAID begs a question in my mind And it's the same about the press. It's like, but if you, why would you go into the press to like, shill for somebody? Like, why would you do that? Like the adventure, the joy would be in like saying what's true and being, outrageous, because obviously we're living in an outrageous time. There's so much going on. And so people in USAID, I believe, actually do think very deeply convinced that they are doing the best and that they're the good guys. And even if, obviously there's going to be scumbags in any organization, but there are tons of people inside Washington, because I know them, because I live there, right outside. These people are deeply, deeply convinced that they're doing the right thing. They're the good guys, and our system has to win against all comers. This is the mentality that exists of the workforce and the people who sort of gravitate to Washington kind of power, like US governmental power. Why anybody would want to be involved if you knew that that's what you were going to end up doing, like being, essentially spreading money around the world to make sure nobody says anything against us, toppling regimes, and like doing all the lovely kind of activities that our US government is so notorious for doing. And so, back to the level of the individual, what kind of person would want to do that? Like, why would you even want to be involved in that if that's how the game is played? And these people, I just think I find it an interesting exercise. I don't know if when you write, you think about the guys like Sullivan. And you know what? I couldn't even think of the former Secretary of State. That's how fast I forgot him, which seems appropriate. That these guys are running around doing what they're doing.
Just, I don't want to
Yeah.
mention his name, but blink and you'll miss him.
Yes. Thank you. That's another witticism. But there's no doubt that these guys think that they're the good guys and like that they're doing a good job and all the rest. And like, if you try to get your mind stretched into that dimension where like, no, if we have to kill all the people in Gaza, if we have to support the genocide that's going on there, then we'll support it, because that's obviously the good thing to do, and the justification that you see, it's tremendous.
Well, I mean, remember, I'm glad you brought up the word gravity in that, because remember, the closer you get to the dark heart of a black hole, the denser the matter gets. And so I think you're getting people here who are really, they may be very, very intelligent in a specific application, but when it comes to a kind of an overarching, consistent, philosophically sound basis, they're sort of sandcastles on clouds, on nebulae, et cetera, et cetera. So
do you think it is that single pointed focus that makes them blind to, it's like, yeah, but by the way, you're also burning the place down. Like, do you think it is that they're so tightly specialized on what they do?
I think it takes a lot of different characters to build a state. It takes a lot of different characters to make a world. And I think that to some level, probably Hanlon's razor applies here, and that is, never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by stupidity. So there are probably enough people there who are just, they're just sort of dense enough that they're following their orders, and they're being told that they're told that they're diversifying the workplace, and they're being inclusive with their very non-inclusive philosophy, and they're being equitable, all these kind of blah blah buzzwords. But there are some people there definitely who I think are just very nefarious sociopathic and or psychopathic actors who recognize, hey, there are a lot of people here who I think they're doing the right thing, and they are willing and able to be mobilized and deployed in service of my, sociopathic.
You can order them
here.
and they will be obedient. That's what we know.
We know that they won't ask questions. I mean, that's that's kind of why they're there, because they're really good at following orders.
Yeah.
They're really, really good at following orders. They may be well-traveled. They may speak multiple languages. They may have, PhDs in molecular biology or quantum computing or whatever it happens to be. But these, for the people who are really pulling the strings, these are, catalyzing agents to affect the kind of change that their worldview demands. And that oftentimes that worldview is a really dark one.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, we don't want to dwell on it because I have to go take a shower after. But
Yeah.
but what do you think's happening? Let's turn to the U.S. Like, what is your take on what's happening? You're probably following a lot of what's happening in the U.S. closer than I am, although I hope not, right? Because it is, I mean,
Oh,
it seems like a dog's breakfast right now.
yeah. Well, it's something of an occupational hazard. I was
Yeah,
remarking to somebody the other day, if you get me after a certain amount of coffee in the morning, I may be sort of prone to sporadic bouts of optimism, and then you get me after maybe a
right.
couple of glasses of wine in the evening, and I may be I may be prone
That's
to
right.
tears of despair. But I try not to dwell on it too much. I mean, it's very much goes back to what you said at the beginning. It's individual action that is really going to triumph here. And I think for people who are relying on, you know, Team Doge to come and mow their lawn for them or make them a sandwich or, help invest their 401k better or what have you, I wouldn't wait around for that. And, likewise, people who thought that whether, if Kamala came in, she was going to change everything for them. Okay, maybe not. But again, there are things that you can do in your own life immediately that will have a much more outsized impact on your quality of life and your happiness and the enrichment of your, those around you, your family, your
Completely.
children, your community,
Yeah.
what have you. But that all that being said, you still have to live in a world of imagined realities. And I don't mean imaginary realities, I mean realities that politicians have imagined into existence for us. So, for example, a border is a border not because it necessarily is a geographical border, but because somebody says if you go over this line, we will shoot you, or we will tax you, or we will fine you, or we will corral you, or whatever. That's a reality that you have to deal with. So we do have to deal with the state, even if philosophically or in some abstract way we want to kind of live our lives as if it didn't impact us. So yes, it is important that what Mr. Trump is doing, for better and for worse. You mentioned the Gaza Alago escapades over there in the Middle East. I mean, when I hear stuff like that, I think, how do you sell this to the nurse who's working like triple shifts in a Louisiana hospital that her tax dollars are going to, what, just evict 2 million people in a place that she probably will never visit, can't find on a map? I mean, like, when is just minding your own business? How is it politically expedient to be to sell that to the truck driver who's doing his third trip over the Rockies for the week, hauling goods for someone
Who
between California
knows?
and wherever?
Who
I mean,
knows what's behind all of that, that announcement?
it's
It's
yeah, so if he's not appeasing those constituents, then who is that appeasing? And then
uh-huh.
again, that kind of gets worrisome. But then you see, he um, has a photo up with a bunch of young girls who are trying to get their sports back, and
Yeah.
praising Riley Gaines for having to share a platform or a dais with Leah Thomas's
Mm.
curve 2 weeks to flatten. I don't know. I mean, like those kinds of things, they are going to impact people in the real world. It's a little bit difficult to tell which way it's going to go. I mean, from this end of the Americas, I see, I know in public, Milei and Mr. Trump are kind of uh, appear very kind of buddy, but they have some very, very fundamental philosophical differences. But on trade, for example, Mr. Milei is coming off the back of his country having imposed 75 years of self-sanctions on its economy here with so-called, import substitution theory, which was just a complete and utter disaster, ongoing, and which really gutted the Argentine economy. It was a huge misallocation of resources because it was being centrally directed from the top
For
down
decades.
for decades and decades. And so,
Yeah.
there's a joke here when something doesn't work. People say, Industria Argentina. It's made here. It probably doesn't work. Or if
Mhm.
it does work, it's 3 times the price that we could get it from abroad. Or there's all these kind of just sort of weird market aberrations that that there was no corrective for, because the state intervened and said, we don't need to produce this. Let's all produce that. And, how did that work out for the Soviets? How did that work out for the communist Chinese? It
Yeah,
doesn't
it's the
work. It's not
fastest way
working
to
for the
poverty.
Cubans now.
Yep. I remember a funny moment, or a funny memory just came to me. I was down in Argentina when Macri was running, or during that election, the runoff, I guess. And I think that was the first time I went down there. I had something shipped down to Argentina.
Mm.
You ever try to ship
It's
something to
probably
Argentina?
still on its way.
No, yeah, I mean, obviously, like, there's no way to pick it up once it arrives there. Like, there is no way
Right.
to go through all of the hoops that you have to jump through to get something. It was like a microphone or something I was recording or whatever. I forget what I was working on, but I was like, oh, you can't get stuff in Argentina. That's how it works. I
Right.
get it now. Like, no, I
Yeah.
can't even imagine like how many people I would have had to bribe to get it, because once I started looking into it, I was like, well, okay, well, what then? And is there going to be another person? And what then? And another one, So it's mind blowing, to really see. It's like,
Well,
oh, you can't do business down here.
yeah, exactly. And so, we have, I was talking to some friends down here right before Christmas, and it's it's the people who, they run small businesses who, for their competitiveness in the marketplace, particularly a globalized marketplace where, they might be, I don't know, a graphic designer, they might be, working on a computer somewhere. If you can't buy the latest technology, or if you can buy it, it's for double or triple the price, you're you're just immediately hogtied right from the get-go. So that severely retards formation of small businesses. And even as far as, I remember talking to my daughter's tutor, whose mom has a kind of online store here, which is Mercado Libre. It's kind of like the
Hmm.
Latin American, for your readers, for your listeners. It's a kind of Amazon down here in Latin America. And for forever, materials, textiles, just weren't available. I mean, as you were saying with a microphone, you just can't get this stuff into the country. And they were talking about, this was before Christmas, they were talking about, well, we're not buying any of our gifts before Christmas because there were some taxes and some import taxes and regulations that were being repealed under Milei's administration. His minister of deregulation, there's actually a deregulation department here, and they're running at about 2 deregulations per day, including weekends, since that department was set up last year. So it's kind of like Doge on steroids, and they've gutted about a third of the federal government so far, with big promises to come. And so they had announced a series of measures that were going to sort of loosen up import restrictions. And here were small business owners, people who were working, second jobs to make ends meet, who were really looking forward to this new and open marketplace, so that they had a fighting chance in being able to serve their domestic customers, to purchase their consumer goods, to invest in inventory for their small business. I mean, these are representative of tens of thousands of people around Argentina who, for the longest period, just had no fighting chance, and who all of a sudden are looking out into the future with some cautious optimism, thinking, wow, are you telling me that my money may not lose 300% of its value, or suffer 300% inflation per year, that I might be able to stock my shelves, that I might be able to have some kind of predictability and reliability in my basic business functioning, that I might be able to get things that other people in other countries have just taken for granted for the past 75
I
years?
just wonder, yeah, I mean, does the optimism peak, or like is it still going up? I mean, certainly you can only be so optimistic. I mean, the changes
Yeah.
are happening. I mean, what's your sense? I mean, I saw you over 2 months ago now. What's your sense? Like, is it continuing to get better? Like, are people even more excited about what's coming? Or is it
I
like in
think
cautious growth phase or?
I mean, it's going to be a case by case basis, but I think, and yes, there's, as I said to our friend Dominic Frisby last week on our Substack live event, it's there are no shortage of rice bowls being broken in the la casta, the political caste that Mr. Milei has sort of set himself against. So there are many, many entrenched interests, as there are in the United States, who don't like this kind of disruption. I mean, they're on the gravy train, to sort of switch metaphors, and they do not want to see that thing derailed. That's their, that's
Yeah, my question is
their.
like, when do those people rear their ugly heads? In the
Well,
US, obviously more than in Argentina. Like, when does that moment come where somebody, Trump made a bunch of executive orders and right away there were lawsuits to try to tie it up in court. Okay, that's part for the course. That's how that game is played. But like, at what stage does Milei or Trump or Elon or, it does seem like a very strange moment, right? Where there's this unbelievable, I think the opportunity is genuine. Like, we're seeing it. You're seeing things
Yeah.
happen in real time. But I also think that it's hard to imagine these people just like, okay, well, you beat us, like, we'll roll
No, yeah,
over.
that they are not going they are not going gently
I
into
can't
that night.
imagine.
But I think, a strategic takedown. I mean, there's a reason why Telem down here, which was the kind of state-funded media arm, was one of the first chicken necks on the chopping block. You have to sort of attack the propagandizing agents. Cut off the flow of
USAID.
information. That's USAID. I don't think that was an accident. We now have, as I was mentioning before, that I was just looking through the list of news outfits that were recipients of just massive grants. And okay, these again aren't impartial actors, but yeah, look, there's definitely going to be pushback. There's going to be lawsuits. There's going to be, I think in the United States, to think that there might not be just this litigation purgatory awaiting all of these executive orders. Yes, of course. But at the same time, you have to get reelected at some point, or your party has to get reelected. This is wildly popular with people. Average people love seeing political elites cut down to size because they recognize that they've been the outsiders standing outside the insiders party for too long.
Yeah.
And whether it's sort of, Ricky Gervais serving it up to the Hollywood elites at the Golden Globes, or Milei, standing and delivering at the World Economic Forum, people don't like being lectured to about, their gas stove by people who fly to climate
Fancy
change
themselves superior.
summits in private jets. It's the
Yeah, yeah. It's
hypocrisy.
odious. It's odious. Yeah.
Odious. It is.
What's interesting, Joel, looking at the comeback kid of Donald Trump, and it's clear. I'm on the side that says it's very obvious that he was a better choice. Like, it's much better that we're in this situation than any other outcome from that election. But the idea that this guy's going to kiss it all and we're going to have a golden age, like, I'll believe that when I see it. But the story of Trump that played out over 8 years plus, where the people who despised him at the beginning are still kind of crowing the same kind of nonsense about what a lout and a cad he is and all the rest, like all the rest of that we've heard over and over again. And the jury and the verdict by pretty much, the majority of the world was like, yeah, but that doesn't matter, right? What matters is we have shit that needs fixing, like now. And we have something like, just the fact that he had just an ounce of common sense was enough, to win that 8 years of lawfare and all the rest. And people were just like, no, 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 give this guy a chance again, because like, we need to get this stuff done. It's a tremendous testament. I know you are only slightly less caustic about democracy than I am, and that no doubt is at least part.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know about
So,
that. I'm pretty caustic about rule by majority.
yeah, yeah, yeah. As is your mentor and my old boss, Bill Bonner, the great Bill Bonner. For
Yeah.
those of you who don't know, absolutely check that Substack out. That's probably one of the best newsletters for any on any topic at any price on the internet too. So I'll put that in the show notes as well. I know you worked closely with Bill all those years. This is the last question I want to ask you, and this is kind of a hard segue. Is that how you became such a good writer? I know I asked you this when I saw you, and like, how much did your influences as a writer, Bill or anybody, right, make you your ability to sort of weave zingers into very, very tight prose. I mean, it's as good as anybody I've ever seen. And as a guy who sort of fancies himself an I aspire to do what you do in some capacity.
Huh.
How did you get there? And like, who does Joel Bowman read? Like, are you assiduously paying attention to the way I pay attention to you?
Oh, well, that's very kind of you to say, first of all. And I remember going to work with Bill early on in the 2000s, and him giving me a bunch of pointers on, sentences that should lead where nobody expects them to lead, and the element of surprise. And obviously he's a master craftsman at what he does. I remember when I went to work at Bonner Private Research, his current Substack, and a shout out to that. Some of his readers who perhaps hadn't been as familiar with my work wrote in to say, "Oh, I see you also use the royal we, and I see some similarities between your writing. Is it because of this?" And I was, of course, flattered, but I had to admit that actually, happily for Bill and happily for me, all of my literary heroes are dead and were poor. And Bill is neither of those things, and I'm very happy about that, because we're all the better for counting him among the army of the upright, as Virginia Woolf said. But my heroes are long gone. When I'm not suffering or enduring the passing parade of modern media, I'm married to a classicist. I spend my entire free time perusing the classics, both modern and ancient. So if I have a book in my hand that's less than, I don't know, 100 years old, it's usually because someone's, because I need to write about it for an upcoming column, but it's generally not by choice.
Anyone you're drawn to over and over again? Like, is there somebody you come back to over and over again that's just like, oh, this guy,
Well,
your first, not
I think
no.
I forget who it was that said all of history is a footnote to Plato. I kind of think all of literary history is a footnote to just to sound extremely pretentious, to Homer. And I'm saying that because I'm always reading Joyce, because there's always more to get out of Joyce.
Yeah,
and you can't read Joyce if you can't read Joyce if you haven't read Homer. I mean, Homer is the source material for all of what I can discover about the human condition, which seems just like such an infinite well of folly and hubris and pride before the fall, and all of these things that just make it's why the market is interesting, because the market is a projection of all. I don't care about the market because of the Dow's down or the S&P's up or like any of that kind of stuff. I know that's what gamifies it for a lot of people who kind of measure their quarterly returns or what, and that's great for people who have the patience and or inclination to follow that. I don't count myself among them, certainly, but just as far as it is a projection of just our tendency, our reliable tendency to groupthink, to just these massive bouts of the Gadarene swine rule. Just because a herd is in formation doesn't mean it knows where it's going right before it tramples, stampedes off the cliff. This reliable tendency of humans to go further into the realms of stupidity and ignorance than anybody thought possible, and then to somehow come back and surprise everybody like Odysseus, and at the very last moment clinch a win or deliver something that you didn't see coming. It's just such a wonderful story to
It's such
to
an
watch.
incredible show. Yeah, it
Indeed,
is.
yeah.
In our own
Wouldn't be dead
lives.
for quids.
Yeah, I mean, I thought of this years ago. It occurred to me that these two forces that are at war within the human breast, like this is the way it's always been done of tradition versus but it's not working anymore. I mean, what we've talked about today on the podcast is like a great groundswell of awareness has finally broken through. It's like, yeah, but the way we're doing stuff isn't working. Let's try something else for God's sake. And then you come to find out that nothing new under the sun. The new thing that you're going to try has some echo back in history, and that this is the value of being a classicist, right? If I can presume to say such a thing to a guy married to a classicist. But these two forces that you see running amok and playing with sort of it is the human condition that we're trying to find a new way, right? A new breakthrough, like something that hasn't been thought of or worked out before, which is very, very rare when it actually happens, when it's truly new, like actually, a new flavor gets into the stew. and that we're living through a time when, well, you're just going to see just incredible things right now. So it's just it's marvelous to get to talk to you on this level and in this capacity. Anything else? Tell people about your novel. I know you did such a good book that I still haven't gotten through. Talk to them about your first work and also where they can find you, and I'll make sure that's in the show notes.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I have what appears to be an incurable addiction to writing literary fiction against my better judgment. But it seems to be something that I can't kind of get away from. I'm
It's
working on a
highly
third novel
reviewed
right now.
by our colleague Doug Casey. He had very good things
Doug
to say
was
about it. I believe that it
Doug was
probably is
very
very readable. Yeah.
Doug was very kind to pen a review for me. The first one's called Morris Alive. It's essentially about the idea of America. First of all, a young man falls in love with an American woman and then American country, and then what he comes to realize all along was an idea embodied in those in adventures that take him on a kind of classic coast-to-coast road trip a la Kerouac, and all the it's a really fine road tripping tradition that your
Damn
your
right.
writers have handed down over the
And
years.
most of that was autobiographical.
I think all fiction is autobiographical in a way, and yeah, so that was the first one. The second one, Night Drew Her Sable Cloak, is a bit more complex to explain in
Yes.
a pithy answer, but it takes place over the course of a century between the Middle Kingdom in China and Mongolia down here in Argentina, and then some kind of globetrotting in between. And I'm working on a third one now, which I can let your readers know. I'm going to invent, I think I'm going to try and invent, although I will no doubt realize along the course of this journey that it has been invented many times before and reinvented. So I'm going to try and flip the dystopia on its head, and I'm going to try and tell the story of a utopian nightmare from the point of view of somebody working in the state. And when they see their world come crashing down and their paradigm shattered and their state outed for the agent and monopoly of force that it really is, they're going to have a kind of comeuppance, and their worldview is going to be shaken, and they're going to realize that they've been told utopia is a nightmare all along, but it's really kind of an awakening from a shroud of brainwashing that they have to kind of come to deal with. So that's the project in
All
hand
right.
at present.
All right. Outstanding. Well, I can't wait for the new one. Joel, I really appreciate it. You're a fine fellow. I'm so privileged that I get a chance to talk to all the great people that I met during my time inside the Agora. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I hope to catch up with you again soon.
Absolutely, Tane. Thanks very much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Take care, my friend. Yep.